What would happen if a group of marginalized kids met and discovered they had powers? No, I'm not talking about X-Men or anything like that. This isn't a superhero story, but rather a horror story that borders on realism. We're talking about a movie that squeezes out the innocence of children and plays with your sense of right and wrong, putting us directly in the perspective of those kids. Today we're going to analyze The Innocents, a movie so realistic you won't want to leave your kid alone until they're 18. Before we start, I wanted to mention that this video doesn't have any spoilers, since I want to make a series where I recommend movies by doing an analysis that I think will actually improve your experience before watching them. So I'll be focusing on a more technical analysis, and in this case, I'll be diving deeper into the film's themes. The Innocents is a 2021 Norwegian supernatural drama written and directed by Eskil Voigt, loose translation. How do you turn a sunny playground into an ethical nightmare without turning off the lights? A harsh and macabre realism and zero cheap jump scares. During a summer in a Norwegian housing complex for children, Ida, her sister Anna, Aisha, and Ben discover they have certain powers. Ben has the power of telekinesis, meaning he can move things with his mind. Aisha has telepathy, which means she can read minds and connect deeply with other people. Anna seems to have an affinity for both powers. The only one who seems to have no powers is Ida, the main character. The fact that they have powers isn't a spoiler, since it happens at the beginning of the movie. But it's important to know this in order to understand some things I'm going to explain to you later. But why is this movie told through the innocent eyes of a child? And why does it do so brilliantly? Aida's family moves to a housing development, so Ida doesn't know anyone. But little by little you see how she starts making friends. And the way she makes friends is very accurate in my opinion, because when I think back to times when I made friends as a kid, it was more or less like that. Usually, friendship just came out of nowhere. And that's kind of what happens with Ida and the others. They sort of run into each other out of nowhere and build a friendship. Even when Ida approaches where they're playing basketball and they kind of reject her. I remember as a kid seeing some neighbor kids playing hide and seek, and I just walked up and said, "Hey, can I play?" And they said yes. Luckily for me, at least not like poor Ida. And after that, we pretty much hung out every day. That's why I think the way they build their friendship, even if it seems forced because it kind of comes out of nowhere, I think it's actually very accurate. Friendships between kids usually just come out of nowhere, and sometimes they're not always the best company. And I've also heard in some reviews people complaining about the absence of parents, that they barely show up and let the kids play outside for so long, and so on. But for me, it's actually a great choice to leave the parents out, because it really emphasizes that we're seeing things from a child's perspective. Because even if you have parents who raise you the best way possible, when kids are alone, sometimes they do crazy things, and the director wants to open that door. So having strict parents would only make it harder to get that message across, since the movie plays with the idea of what a child does when their parents aren't watching. I also wanted to talk about another scene in the movie that's pretty controversial. It happens at the beginning, so it's not really a spoiler, but it does have quite an impact. It's a moment where people say the movie crossed the line. And it's a scene where there's animal violence, and it's a really tough scene to watch, I won't deny it, especially if you're an animal lover like me. But honestly, for me, that scene didn't cross the line at all. There are people who say they would literally remove that scene from the movie, and I totally get that it can be shocking for a lot of people, but that scene is essential to get the movie's message across. And I think a lot of people missed it precisely because it's so intense. The main point is that innocence, even though it might seem like it, isn't always a good thing, and how kids learn about the world by pushing boundaries to the extreme just to see what happens. And that's what happened with the cat. They threw it from quite a high place just to see, just to find out if it would land on its feet or whatever. There wasn't necessarily a reason behind it. They just wanted to see what would happen. And the boy thought the cat was dead, so he got sad. But suddenly the cat moves and the boy kills it. And even though it sounds harsh, it's very accurate. I've seen an analysis that compared this scene to a scene from Stephen King's Danse Macabre. In Danse Macabre, Stephen King recalls an anecdote attributed to Bing Crosby. His son's turtle died, and the father organized a funeral in a cigar box because his son was devastated by the death of his little pet. And when they're burying it, the turtle moves. Then the boy looks at his father and says, "What if we kill it?" Stephen King uses that story to talk about children's curiosity about death. I'm going to put myself out there a bit too. When I was a kid, I was kind of a jerk to insects, to be honest. I remember when I was little, I would put several small ants next to some bigger ones so they'd fight in a bucket. And that might seem shocking to you today, but that's how kids learn where the boundaries are, especially if they're in a place where there's not much parental supervision or hardly any stimulation. Nowadays, there are video games, computers, cell phones. Back when I was doing Ant Wars, it was 2007 and my town was pretty poor. So much so that there were barely any paved streets. So just imagine having cell phones, video games, and all that. And that's more or less the setting the movie gives you. A place where kids can get lost simply because they don't have their parents constantly hovering over them. But at the same time, it's a lonely place where there's hardly anything to do. That's also why it's crucial that the story takes place during the vacation period. The movie suggests that innocence lasts only as long as supervision does, and it also plays with the duality of good and evil precisely by putting us in the perspective of an innocent child and showing that innocence can lead to cruel acts. It's interesting to see how power serves as a metaphor. Telepathy is like forced empathy. It's not just reading minds, it's taking in someone else's emotional noise without asking for permission and with no mute button. Telekinesis is like rage with a direction. Emotion becomes an applied force, that urge of, "I want this to disappear." Ben's character is really well constructed for me precisely because of that nuance. He seemed more like an impulsive kid than someone evil. Sure, he does horrible things, but he does them with that impulse kids have when they get angry, that sudden outburst they get. And since Ben has telekinesis, his impulsiveness becomes dangerous. And there's also something very subtle in that metaphor of power. The movie presents you with powers where you can hurt from a distance. The movie is telling you that a lot of times we hurt others without touching them. A taunt, a look, or indifference. But what if instead of putting ourselves in the perspective of a child, we put ourselves in the perspective of the killer? Not only that, what if the killer knows you're watching? What if they make you an accomplice to their crimes? We're talking about Funny Games. One of the most uncomfortable movies you'll ever see, but not because it's gory, but because the killer also sees you. I'll leave the video here for you to watch.